Okay, I think we'll begin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lorne Terrell, Dean Emeritus of the Faculty and Distinguished University Professor. I am honored to welcome you today on behalf of the University of Alberta and the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, and I'm particularly honored that Karen, Richard's wife, asked me to MC this afternoon's event. Today we come together to celebrate the life and the legacy of Richard Fedorak, Dean of the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, a world-renowned gastroenterologist, internationally respected researcher, mentor, beloved father, husband, and friend. Thank you all for joining us in this very special celebration of the life of Dr. Richard Fedorak. In the face of loss, we find solace in remembering the life of an exceptional man and all the contributions he made to the faculty, the care he provided to his patients, the joy he brought to all of us. Richard believed in the importance of celebrating excellence. What better way to honor him than celebrating his excellence, his spirit of service, and all the great things that made him the person we came to admire and love. Richard touched so many lives. He had a great presence that made us enjoy the laughter, the celebrations, the hard work, and the lessons he left for us all. I always remember Richard as a visionary, energetic, and driven individual, very passionate about the success and history of this Faculty of Medicine. He was a caring family man. I had the privilege of meeting with Richard on a regular basis, about once a month, and there are a number of things that I'll always remember about these meetings. Each meeting, it seemed, would always begin with Richard telling me that about some new faculty member or some new discovery he found within the faculty. He was extremely proud of the faculty and the members that did terrific work. He had a vision for the faculty and how it should develop, and he wanted to lead the faculty. As I mentioned, he had passion, energy, and vision. He worked hard to make sacrifices to achieve these goals. And there was one other element that I really enjoyed about Richard. He was very proud of his heritage, his Ukrainian heritage, and he said, you know, I'm the first Ukrainian dean, and I'm very proud of that, and I wanted to be successful. Just like me, I know that all of you had an opportunity to meet Richard, spend time with him, and the many facets of his life that were important and inspired him. Today we'll be hearing thoughts and memories from some of those who were closest to him and want to honor him. I would like to begin by inviting to the stage Dr. Denis Kuramoto, Acting Dean of the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, and a close friend and trusted colleague of Richard throughout his illness. Denis.
Thank you, Lauren. Full house. I don't think I've seen Bernard Snell full before. We deeply miss our friend and leader, and today we celebrate his life and what he meant to all of us. The fact that we are building this tribute with stories of many guests and speakers truly honors his leadership style. Working alongside Richard in the Dean's office was a meaningful experience that allowed me to see the faculty through his eyes. He loved the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, and his mission as Dean was to take us from good to great. He wanted to change the culture from just good enough to one of genuine pride in excellence, and to build our faculty's legacy of more than 100 years. He truly believed that culture eats strategy for breakfast. His vision was to change the culture so that we are more socially accountable, collaborative, innovative, and at times disruptive. Richard believed our greatest asset was our people, and he worked to enable people to do their best. He created a new awards coordinator position to help us recognize the fantastic people in our faculty. He initiated the creation of our new recognition wall here that you can see on the second floor in the Walter Mackenzie Center to honor the lifetime giving of our donors. He wanted the hundreds of people who walk through the halls of this hospital every day to see that wall and to know how grateful we are for the support that we have received. He was like a proud father. He was so proud of us all. Richard was an innate relationship builder, always looking for new avenues of collaboration with key partners like Alberta Health Services, the Health Foundation, the Tech Edmonton, other faculties at the U of A, and medical schools across Canada and around the world. The very fact that today we have Genevieve Morneau, President and CEO of the Associations of the Faculties of Medicine of Canada, speaks volumes about the respect Richard earned by his fellow Canadian medical deans. Thank you for being here, Dr. Morneau. Richard also had a great respect for our proud history and initiated several projects to highlight it. He organized a panel of professors emeriti to share their stories with alumni and current faculty. He commissioned a film to capture the history of the Division of Gastroenterology at the U of A. That documentary is called On the Shoulders of Giants. He always said that we are standing on the shoulders of giants. I find comfort in knowing that we have another giant's shoulder to stand on. To honor him and his legacy, the faculty will establish the Richard Fedorak History of Medicine annual lecture. We will continue towards fulfilling his and our goals and build together a faculty that remains at the front lines of research, education, and care to serve all people. Thank you for coming today to celebrate our friend and leader. We believe in the bright future he envisioned, and I know that we will each do our best to make him proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis. Learning about our history and being proud of our past was certainly a priority for Richard. His affinity for history was something so well known about him that someone, and we still don't know who it was, decided to leave a very valuable piece of our history in a metal box on his office. One summer day, he came to the office and found this, and he soon realized it was a time capsule once nested in the cornerstone of the old university hospital, first hospital, the Strathcona Hospital. Inside the capsule were the original blueprints, the original blueprints of the hospital. Whoever left this time capsule with him knew it would be in good hands. Richard set in motion a project to have the documents restored by the Provincial Archives of Alberta. They now live in the university's research collections facility in the South Campus. But because he wanted us to relish and remember this piece of history as well, he arranged for reproductions of these blueprints to be displayed right here on the second floor, close to the Dean's office in the Walter Mackenzie Health Sciences Center. I invite you to see these after our event today, as they just went up today. Continuing with our guest speakers, who will share some stories, I would like to introduce Dr. Karen Croker, an associate professor in the faculty's Division of Gastroenterology and one of Richard's colleagues and mentors. Catherine.
I think he would call me a mentee, but that's okay. So it's an honor for me today to speak at Richard's celebration of life. He was instrumental in teaching me not only gastroenterology, but how to be a physician and leader. He had all these phrases he would repeat: one touch, lean production, which I actually think he stole from Toyota, confidence without tangential thoughts, that was just for me, take the best from everyone, and then my favorite, never let money stand in your way. When I met Richard in 2006, I had no idea he would become my teacher, mentor, advocate, colleague, cheerleader, and friend. I loved his quick wit and that smirky smile, which made me laugh out loud. He was so much fun to tease. Fedorak loved medicine, and in particular, he loved IBD, and this love was infectious. He is the reason that I became an IBD specialist. His clinics were busy, fully booked with interesting patients, many of whom he had known a long time, and others that were new to him. He was astute in his diagnostic ability and always knew what to do next. He prided himself in being a complete doctor, which meant he attended not only to the GI issues, but to the non-GI issues as well. Richard was always ready to teach and share his knowledge and wisdom. Even after I was hired on as a staff physician, he would poke his head into my room and say to the patient, "Can I borrow your doctor?" Usually this was to teach me something, show me an unusual manifestation of disease or some weird side effect, but sometimes it was just to tell me that he had bought me lunch and it was there. I would look at him and laugh, and I would say I have to go back and see my patient before I join him for lunch. He understood the importance of mentorship. He believed that his legacy was in the people that he taught and mentored. I was fortunate to be mentored by him and had the opportunity to meet with him on countless occasions, which he called visitations. Sometimes all I would get would be a few minutes if I was willing to walk with him to his next meeting, and I learned to get to the point if I wanted a little advice, what to do with a patient or how to approach a certain challenge. I remember texting him for one such visitation when he was new to the dean's office. He said, "Tomorrow, 7. I'm like, "Ooh, AM or PM?" Knowing equally was actually likely. Fortunately for me, it was the AM. He had an uncanny ability to know when I just needed a word of encouragement, or other times when I needed to be challenged to do more or just to be better. Because he expressed confidence in me and my abilities, it was easier for me to believe in myself, and for that I'll always be grateful.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coker. And Richard's work through our faculty often had a significant impact on the whole university. I would like to welcome Dr. David Turpin, the university president and vice chancellor, who has joined us today. David?
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon to celebrate Richard Fedorak's life. For the past 3.5 years, I had the tremendous good fortune of working with Richard as Dean of the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. I'm honored to share a few memories of his remarkable leadership with you today. A few weeks ago, soon after Richard passed, I stopped by to offer my condolences to the staff in the Dean's office. As I spoke with them, I was reminded of the many values that guided Richard as a leader. He was passionate and dedicated and had an unwavering focus on excellence. He worked hard to better himself and those around him. He stood up for what he believed in. And as I met with his team, I saw the lasting impression these qualities left on the people around him, myself included. When a conflict or a crisis arose, I would often hear from Richard within minutes. He was always the first to reach out. He did what all great leaders do when there is a problem. He came to the table with ideas and solutions. I could always rely on Richard to arrive with a good counsel and modest advice on the path forward. In meetings, Richard was seldom the first person to jump into a conversation. Instead, he brought a different and invaluable kind of leadership to the dean's table. Others would be eager to jump in early. Richard would wait and listen. When he engaged, he synthesized the conversation, and instinctively, you knew two things. First, that we had all decided on the direction we were going to take. And second, that we would now pursue that path together. In short, Richard made everybody better. It was that collaborative leadership style that expressed how deeply Richard cared about the University of Alberta. He was an unparalleled advocate for the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, no question. But he was also a true institutional player, and he held our full community's success and well-being in the very highest of esteem. So on behalf of the University of Alberta, I want to voice our collective gratitude for Richard's outstanding contributions to the University of Alberta, and for his tireless efforts to enrich this university and the people who work and study here. I also want to extend my sincere condolences and support to Karen, to Richard's family, all his loved ones, and his friends. And lastly, I want to express how keenly we miss his presence on campus and how much we will appreciate his legacy for generations to come. Richard, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very much, Dr. Turpin. Partnerships, as you heard, were such an important part of Richard and who he was. He was a builder of partnerships. And so we will have the opportunity to hear from one of those key partnerships, the University of Calgary, and asked to come to the stage Dr. John Meddings, the Dean of the University of Calgary's Cummings School of Medicine, a fellow gastroenterologist, and a very close friend of Richard throughout his training and his life.
It is a full hall. So thank you, everyone, for having me come. And I suspect some of you are wondering, why is someone from Calgary coming up to talk about Richard? And I'd like to tell you that what you may not know is that Richard and I have been friends now for 39 years. I'd like to share with you some of the thoughts and some of the aspects of Richard that you may not know. I'd like you to get to know my friend Richard a little better. A delightful man, a truly powerful leader, and truly, simply a wonderful person. So Richard and I go back 39 years. We weren't close friends, at least in the beginning. I don't think you'd say that. But when I look back over my academic and medical career, Richard was always there. Always had Richard somewhere on the horizon. Sort of like the sun behind clouds. You know it's there, but you're not actually sure where it is. But Richard was always there. He was a wonderful, caring, and an inspiring friend. I have to tell you, I miss him dearly already. We went to medical school here at the U of A. Richard was in the class ahead of me, and those of you who know the curriculum understand that in the last 2 years as student interns, groups from the third-year class and the fourth-year class often meet. And I actually remember very clearly sitting in the emergency room one night of the old hospital, which is just about where we are now, perhaps a little bit further to the north, sitting with Richard, realizing that we actually shared a lot in common. We had a lot of interesting ideas that we wanted to do, and we thought we could do them together. Interestingly, we both ended up doing gastroenterology. We both went to the US to study, and at the time when it wasn't terribly popular to study to be a clinician scientist, we both undertook clinician scientist training. Richard went to Chicago to work with Michael Field. I went to Dallas to work with John Dici, and we kept in touch. Much harder back then, no email back then, but we actually kept in touch. And we ended up coming back at the same time, and a bit of a funny story. We both, it was assumed, were going to come back to the University of Alberta. The Division of Gastroenterology all of a sudden had one position, and they invited us both back to interview for that position. Yes, Karen. They interviewed us on the same day, We gave rounds back to back, and we went to separate dinners that evening. They scrupulously kept us apart. I don't know whose idea this was, but they did a wonderful job. What they didn't know was that Richard and I had already talked about this. We knew we were coming back on the same day. And Richard had organized to go for a beer that night so that we could discuss the whole thing, which we did. We went and had a beer. Richard ended up coming to Edmonton. I ended up going to that horrible city in the south and went to Calgary, and we kept in touch. We both ended up becoming the heads of our divisions of gastroenterology. And that actually was a wonderful time. There hadn't been a strong sense of interaction between Edmonton and Calgary in the GI community. In fact, I'd probably say there was a strong sense of non-interaction between the two cities, was probably the best way of phrasing it. I think perhaps Richard and I, coming from large places in the States, realized that Alberta was too small not to work collaboratively together. And so we very deliberately, the two of us, set up numerous meetings, symposia, events that actually carry on today, where the members of Calgary and Edmonton's GI communities do many things together. And I have to say, when I look back at all the things that I've done or been a part of in my academic career, this is one of the things I'm most proud of, and I actually know that Richard was as well. It was interesting. In 2004, things changed. I got invited to come here as the chair of medicine, ostensibly Richard's boss. We had to have another beer. And we did. We went to the same place across the street. We had a beer. We decided at that point that I was not going to deal with anything in the GI division that was totally Richard's. And Richard would tell me where all the landmines were in the department so that I did not inadvertently step on them before trying to dismantle some of them. And that actually worked incredibly well. Later on, we became deans of the two schools. And I have to tell you, this was a glorious time. We had numerous conversations over that time. We probably spoke three or four times a week, sometimes something trivial, sometimes something major, often just for advice. And the interesting thing when I look back on it is that unlike other times, when Richard and I decided we wanted to do something, we didn't need a legally signed MOU. If Richard said he was going to do something, I knew he'd do it. And I'm sure he felt the same about me, and we had the chance to do that. So I cherish those memories. Those are really important memories for me of Richard, and I miss Richard deeply. I miss his wisdom. I miss his easy approachability, and I truly miss being able to share my issues with Richard. He was always a source of great wisdom. I have to say that I think both the medical schools and, in fact, the province have benefited greatly from this very long relationship that the two of us have had over decades. And Richard is going to be missed by all of us in the province. But in my mind, I have to say, I think Richard's always going to be there. I know that whenever I end up with an issue that I would have called Richard about before, in my mind, I'm just going to simply say, what would Richard have done? And I'm going to remember him that way. He won't be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for those very heartfelt and personal memories of Richard. Faculty's close relationships were extremely important, as I've mentioned, and partner organizations. Richard's ability to forge close ties has helped us to raise funds, to advance research, and to improve patient care. The faculty's relationship with the University Hospital Foundation was very dear to Richard. He demonstrated how much he valued this partnership, both in his relentless service to it as a board member and through his constant efforts to install a culture of collaboration and stewardship. It is my pleasure to now introduce Mr. Jim Brown, Board Chair of the University Hospital Foundation, to share a few words with us. Jim?
Thank you, Lauren. While Richard was interim dean and then ultimately as dean, he was a member of the University Hospital Foundation board. On behalf of the University Hospital Foundation, it was an honor and privilege to have served on the board of trustees with Richard. Richard had an amazing capacity to create a vision and inspire others to follow, and this ability was on display on a regular basis, and it was always with the purpose of advancing care for patients at the University of Alberta Hospital. As a great partner with the Foundation, Richard was very generous in sharing his valuable time and passion with staff and donors. On one occasion, he led an engagement event which culminated with everyone getting to practice a procedure on a pork chop. It was a pork chop that Richard brought in. It was great. During that same event, and by the way, there's a picture of that event that's on the wall next to the blueprints that Lauren mentioned, and so you can see it. During the same event, one of our board members, Guy Scott, agreed to volunteer to be a patient for a FibroScan, a procedure used to diagnose fatty liver disease. Guy was asked to remove his shirt and get laid down on the table, which he did. The fact that Richard took the time from a very busy schedule and lead an event like this and was able to motivate Guy to hop on a table to allow the demonstration speaks to the man that Richard was. He understood the importance of fundraising, and his efforts led to the formation of incredible relationships with people like Al Owen and the Ziedler family, and in turn, the evolution of the gastroenterology program at the University of Alberta Hospital as a world leader in patient care and groundbreaking research. He also helped to formulate a plan for strategic partnerships between the University Hospital Foundation, government, and industry, and was instrumental in the creation of the Merck Invention Accelerator and the U of A Accelerator at Enterprise Square. Richard mentioned to me one time that he would rather have had the lab on the main floor of Enterprise Square, right on Jasper Avenue, so when people walked by, they could look into the lab and see what was happening inside. Notwithstanding, he was proud of that lab. I think that helps explain Richard's most enduring legacy in the field of healthcare philanthropy, showing other doctors and healthcare professionals the big picture and how it works. You belong to a community, and you need to show up in every way to bring people in. If you want to advance your program, you'll need more than just government funding to make it happen. That's why he was so tremendous to work with on all levels, from board meetings to donor events and sharing the power of philanthropy in changing and saving lives. He wanted nothing but the best for his patients, and he knew how to make that happen. He was one of a kind, and he will be sorely missed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. This leads nicely into the fact that Richard was a very caring physician. And he mentioned important how research often leads to innovations that changes patient care. And Richard was truly an innovator and someone that understood the importance of these changes and how it would affect patients. He was a compassionate doctor, a persistent advocate for improving patients' quality of life. He was a pioneer in bringing new therapies to the patients. I would like to now invite Mr. Fernando Pisani, a former Oiler with a remarkable record, and I think we all remember the 2006 playoffs. And I would just mention that Fernando scored 14 goals in 18 games, and 5 of those goals were game winners. Not that I'm a hockey trivia. Mr. Pisani was one of Richard's former patients. Please welcome to the stage Mr. Pisani.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fernando Pisani, and I was lucky to be one of Dr. Fedorak's patients. Dr. Fedorak changed the course of my life when he entered it, and I know he has done the same for countless others. I can only imagine the number of lives he has impacted. In 2005, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis by my family physician. I was playing for the Oilers and living out my childhood dream. In the summer of 2007, I began to have symptoms of a flare-up, and things went downhill fast. In a matter of weeks, I lost 55 pounds, going from a 205-pound athlete in top condition to barely being able to walk the stairs to my bedroom. I was hospitalized and told that I need to have surgery immediately. It was at this point I was lucky enough to come under the care of Dr. Fedorak. I refused to accept that the life-changing surgery was my only option, and Dr. Fedorak was the only person who gave me options. And Dr. Fedorak was the only person who gave me options and put a plan in place. It was a scary time for me and my family, but Dr. Fedorak's knowledge and confidence was very comforting. I knew I was in good hands and was able to feel at ease with his course of action. He was ultimately able to find a medication which I responded to, and I began to recover. By December of 2007, I had begun to heal, regained my strength, and was able to play in the first game of the season back in an Oiler uniform. I have been under his care ever since and was able to enjoy 3 more seasons playing the game I love. Dr. Fedorak gave me the life I had worked so hard to achieve, and I will be forever grateful. Dr. Fedorak wasn't only my doctor, but he was my friend. I can't say I enjoyed seeing him on the way to the colonoscopy room. But I enjoyed my office visits, chatting and joking with him. He always had time to answer any questions and concerns I had, as well as patiently listening to my ideas about changing my treatment before gently shutting them down without coming right out and saying he was the world-renowned doctor and I should just let him do his job. On behalf of myself, my family, and the many other families he has touched, thanks, Doc.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Great coverage of some of Richard's side that not all of us get to know, his patient care. As a researcher and educator in the Division of Gastroenterology, Richard was an active part of the faculty's Department of Medicine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barbara Ballerman, Chair of the Department of Medicine, for her thoughts on Richard.
Thank you, Lauren. So when I was asked to say a few words at this celebration of life, I said to myself, how do you know a person? How do you best know a person? You best know a person by how others have experienced that individual. So instead of me recounting some of the things that have happened to me, I decided to canvass the department. Now the department is 200 people, and I ended up getting a large number of emails recounting many stories about Richard Fedorak, and I have picked a few of these just to illustrate how great a person he was in the department. So from Karen Goodman, who is a PhD in the Division of Gastroenterology, I heard this. She said, Richard Fedorak is the reason I moved from Texas to the University of Alberta. He helped establish the connection I needed to address community concerns about H. pylori in the Northwest Territories. He arranged for Alberta Health Services to donate endoscopy personnel time for the Aklavik project, and he donated his own time to join the endoscopy team in Aklavik. And then she wrote, this June, he wrote an email to me to congratulate me on an award, on a grant application that was successful. And he wrote, Karen, let me add my congratulations as well, and also to add that the research project you led in Aklavik is still the most memorable and personally impactful research experience I have had in my career. Richard. Karen writes, I am so grateful to have had his help and collaboration for all these years. Zaim Zidiki, who is a neurologist, was involved in Richard's care during this last year, and he wrote, when I mentioned my research to Richard, his eyes lit up. He smiled and started reminiscing about his own work. And then Zaim wrote, actually, I will always remember his shoes. I kept noticing that they were polished and shining every time I saw him for 16 years. Not a speck. Dr. Kao, Dina Kao in the Division of Gastroenterology wrote, "I needed a mentor to help with my academic career. I asked Richard Fedorak, and he did not hesitate for a minute. He connected me to the right people and got me involved in some of his clinical trials, which helped me develop my own research program. He implemented a plan of monthly meetings, usually at 6 p.m. or later on Mondays, until I got promoted. And then he called me the morning after the promotion hearing. Now, the thing is that Richard at the time was dean, and he said to me in the morning after, I would hear good news from my department chair. And she said, I would not have the career I have today without him. He was a wonderful mentor and friend. A physician in the department who would like to remain anonymous became Richard Fedorak's patient because the person had IBD, and wrote, Richard met with me in consultation after hours because I was on call. He put together an incredibly accurate picture of my medical condition, and with laser vision, he saw through my tendency to minimize my symptoms. His tremendous experience in IBD became clear as he recommended different treatment options, and I ended up enrolling in a trial that was very beneficial to me. This person, as a physician, wrote, this was a great example of the power of listening and observing as a consultant, and I realized that Richard brought this same attention to his patients. He was an incredible physician. Juan Gonzalez Abraldez, also from GI, wrote, when I came here, Richard asked me to meet and discuss science, and I vividly remember him saying, I wrote papers and they got rejected because I did not put enough work into them. Dr. Abraldez said to me, it was the first time in my career that I heard a senior academic recognize that he was responsible for the rejection of his paper, rather than assuming that the stupid reviewers did not understand the papers. And Bruce Ritchie wrote, hi, Barbara, he said. Richard was a classmate of mine, graduating in 1978. He was one of the key people organizing our 40th reunion this year before he became so terribly ill. My classmates were threatening to put him in a wheelchair and take him down to the Mayfair Golf Club for our dinner on homecoming weekend. But because he wasn't well enough, we streamed the event, and we hoped that he watched it live. He also said, Richard's son played hockey on the same team as my own son. Richard and I therefore spent many mornings, evenings, and weekends drinking coffee in the stands, doing some curbside consultations, but mostly talking about families. Richard was a big supporter of the biobank through Seeger, and he brought CFI funding to one of our large blood processing robots. And then Vivian Mushawar, who's in physical medicine and rehabilitation, writes, I feel incredibly fortunate for having the opportunity to interact with Richard Fedorak when he was dean. He was very supportive of the SMART network, and the SMART network is the sensory motor adaptive rehabilitation technology, so really out there in terms of innovation. She says he was a leader who enthusiastically supported innovations that improved patient care, took action, and made a difference. And then finally, on a lighter note, a professor who also would like to remain anonymous wrote, prior to Richard becoming dean, I was often asked by colleagues in other centers whether I knew him, and then, probably trying to find out whether I was in the loop, they would ask how well I knew him. Initially, I would say that I knew Richard, but not well, and the response didn't garner a lot of warmth or respect. But being of a certain demographic cohort, my family doctor felt it was time for my screening colonoscopy. In the endoscopy suite, my IV had already been inserted, and I had assumed the ready position for the procedure. Imagine my surprise when I heard Richard Fedorak's voice behind me introducing himself as my endoscopist. Being the consummate clinician, he put me at ease with small talk about my career, research, how the family, etc. was, and then it was time for La La Land. After that, when people asked how well I knew the Dean of Medicine, I replied with an enigmatic smile, I feel the Dean knows me very well. One could say almost to my inner core. I feel I'm definitely in the loop. So for the Department of Medicine, Richard empowered many to step up to the challenge of academic medicine and to have courage to lead. He found tangible solutions to complex problems, often through unconventional ways, even if this sometimes raised eyebrows. He had this way of finding money and of mobilizing resources to move projects forward. And I hear some giggling because people know what this was all about. He was and will remain part of the fabric of this department through the many ways in which he influenced us and changed our paths. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Barbara, for those wonderful memories and many of the memories from people within your department. It's always fascinating to hear the many stories that come from Richard's colleagues, giving us a richer view of his work, ethic, and his personality. And I'd like to invite another colleague, and I'm sure he gave Richard advice in threes, 1, 2, 3, or he would ask Richard what his vision would be, 1, 2, 3. Dr. Paul Armstrong is a distinguished university professor and one of the truly great leaders in this faculty. Paul.
Thank you, Lauren. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to speak on behalf of my distinguished colleague and treasured friend, Richard Fedorak. Karen, your husband, Kristen, Ryan, your father, was truly a man for all seasons. I first met him 25 years ago in this institution on the occasion of his annual report, and as we sat together, it became clear to me that I was in the presence of a man with prodigious talent, extraordinary energy, and a bold vision. 3 years later, I had the pleasure of appointing him as head of gastroenterology at this institution, and then the good sense to stand back and let him run, and he built a world-class division of gastroenterology that excelled across the spectrum of education, research, patient care, and future directions that impacted people world around with his extraordinary work. It was during that time that I paid him the highest compliment that one physician can pay to another. I referred my wife to his care and assured her that he was a man who had great knowledge and expertise and skill and compassion. And I remember well her returning that day after being examined by Richard and undergoing a procedure. And she said, I asked how it went, and she said, very well. She said, but you forgot to tell me one thing about Richard. And I said, well, what was that? She said, you didn't tell me he was so handsome. And I confessed that I hadn't appreciated that, but apparently Karen, the nurses in the GI unit had, and I'm sure you knew it a long time ago. He was a man of great humility, a man who had an understated presence, a man with a self-deprecating sense of humor that was wry and rich in when one was in its presence. In 2015, he assumed the role that many of us thought he was born to play. He became the leader of this faculty. And one could sense within weeks that there was an uplifting of the spirit of all of us, and his passion, his vision that you've heard much about, his energy, his ability to see things clearly, the logic, the principled behavior, and the meaningful changes that he brought about were extraordinary. It was during that time that we began a series, Lauren, of quarterly dinners, and advice was indeed traded, sometimes unsolicited but always appreciated, and we would share our dissatisfaction with the status quo, our passion and dreams for the future. And as the evening wore on and we reached the lower part of the bottle of wine, we began to talk about our families and what was really important in our lives. And he always remarked on his support of family, the role of his wife and his children, and how that helped him achieve the work-life balance that is often a challenge for those that are high achievers. The second last time that I met him, he said, "Paul, I think I've figured it out." And he showed me this picture, which is a paradigm and vision for the faculty in 2019 of an integrated academic health system that would take the capacity of Alberta Health Services and this faculty and produce truly a world-class event. And then he said, and by the way, I've got another idea, which is this precision medicine ecosystem that John Mennigs and I have been working hard on. And these are my plans, and planted them in front of me. As I think of him today and have thought about him over the last month or so, I'm brought back to the words of Alfred Lord Tennyson and the last line of his poem, Ulysses, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And I would submit, ladies and gentlemen, that we could honor Richard Fedorak's legacy by tomorrow beginning with these visions to work harder, aim higher, and do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. We hear so much about Richard's excellence as a clinician and his ability to mentor those who wanted to follow in his footsteps. I'd like to now welcome Winnie Wong in the Division of Gastroenterology and one of those people that has followed Richard.
So, extended Fedorak family, friends and colleagues. So I met Richard 22 years ago, just when he was just starting as a divisional director. Whether it's the wisest decision or not, he's the guy who hired me 20 years ago. So at that time, the size of our division is very modest at the very best. There was only 11 MDs and 5 PhDs. And in fact, in total, there were only 20 gastroenterologists in the city of Edmonton. Back then, recruitment to Edmonton has not always been the easiest. So Richard actually had the foresight to realize that the best chance of recruitment and retention is to grow our own. So what is his strategy? Well, get people interested in GI early on in medical school and medical residency by excellent teaching and role modeling. Create a kick-ass GI residency program, and that pun is totally intended because we are gastroenterologists. Okay? And then facilitate and support their post-residency training all over the world so that they could bring back cutting-edge research and knowledge to benefit Edmontonians. And that he did. So fast forward 20 years, the GI division, now just at the U site, has 24 MDs, and there are now more than 50 gastroenterologists in the city of Edmonton. As we built our division and city GI group with homegrown talents, our reputation grew to attract international talents and leaders, and now, as you heard, enjoying an international reputation. Over the years, our staff retention record is excellent, and that's not because people have no place to go, but rather it's the sense of community or family that Richard has always espoused and tried to instill in each and every one of us. And this is not just at the local level. CDDW, or Canadian Digestive Diseases Week, as it's known, is now a flagship program attended by most gastroenterologists across Canada. But this wasn't always the case. So the GI meeting used to be part of the Royal College meeting. It was not that well attended. So they felt that they wanted to instill a strong sense of community with a standalone meeting. So in 1996, Richard was amongst a small group of people tasked with organizing the first CDDW. So I still recall him telling the story that he had to use his own credit card to guarantee several hundred blocks of room because he hasn't sorted out the sponsorship yet. Okay? So that's classic Richard. Just take these giant brave leaps into the unknown, and he will always make it work. And that's his modus operandi for the last 20 years that I've known him. At the local level, he's always instilled that sense of community and fellowship in our division and our city GI group. We look out for and look after each other. One story particularly sticks in my mind. So many years ago, we were in Jasper for our annual GI resident retreat. On the very last day, one of our GI residents, who was pregnant at the time, fell ill. And she informed us at the last minute that she was going to stay alone in Jasper, and that she was then going to take public transit back several days later. Well, as soon as Richard heard wind of that, he would have none of that. He said, in GI, we leave no one behind. Okay? So what he did was that we made a hospital bed. I think we still owe some linens to Jasper Park Lodge. We made a bed in one of the cars. We assigned one of the co-residents to attend to the resident. And the 4 remaining cars who were still left form a caravan. And that way we could look after each other. And after white knuckling it for about 5.5 hours, we all made it home alive and safe. So last month, Richard very reluctantly had to leave us behind. Now it is up to us to remember that strong sense of community that he had instilled in our group to help us take on new challenges and thrive for new excellence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Winnie. Richard's legacy and mentorship was broad, and so I invited another one of his mentees, Brendan Halloran, assistant professor in the Division of Gastroenterology and the son of Richard's good friend, Phil Halloran, to speak on behalf of the mentees.
You know, Pisani, you're the only one who got the pre and post applause. You notice that, right? I don't know what that's about. I've never scored any playoff goals. I'm really honored to have been asked to come here and share some memories about Richard, and I was asked to do that from the perspective of a student, but truthfully, I didn't know Richard when I was a student. I really met him when I was a resident, and over the next 10 years, he became an incredibly important force in my life for guidance, for wisdom, humor, and support. One of my first meetings with Richard was to talk about a possible research project. It was supposed to be something that spanned the next 10 months, and so I finished my pitch, and he cocked his head to the side, looked at me, and that little smile that he had, and he said, Halloran, I don't really see the next 10 months. I think I see the next 10 years. I think I've got your career all mapped out. It's a little overwhelming at the time, but I can tell you that nearly 12 years later, he made good on every part of that statement. He had a vision and an amazing ability to read the person in front of him. He was able to see your strengths and your weaknesses, but always with a view to unlocking your potential. He wanted people to find a niche and be happy in it, and for people to excel. He was a true mentor in that he wanted you to become better. He wanted people around him to rise. He expected excellence, and he always led by example. He also had an absolutely infectious love of science and medicine, and he used that to be intensely persuasive. He convinced me to sign up in GI here in Edmonton. He called me every day until I agreed to that. Winnie did a little bit of that calling as well. Then he told me that the best thing for me was to get out of here. He sent me away to fellowships in Europe and the United States. And then he was the one who really convinced me to come back to Edmonton, which was no small task when you're living in Los Angeles. And then when I came back, he spent endless time making sure that I was coping and managing. I felt like I was the high-maintenance child that he never wanted. I remember one day in particular, we sat down over at Earl's, as was kind of customary for us. Big glass of red wine, which was what he would order as soon as we sat down. And he said, "So what's going on with you?" I said, Richard, it's busy in GI. I'm not really getting enough time for my research. Barbara's not going to be incredibly happy with me. And he said, you need purple days. I said, what's a purple day? He said, well, those are research days in my calendar. Sandy makes them purple, and you can't book anything on a purple day. You just need more purple days. I said, that's fine, Richard, and the research is all good, but I'm actually quite tired as well. And he said, oh, you need a blue week. And just like that, with his humor and his quirkiness, everything felt better. It was this amazing gift. I always felt like when he was around, he kind of brought the calm. And I think that whole experience really culminated when I was going through a difficult time in the last year. And Richard was really the first person out of my kind of immediate circle to come to me. He picked me up, he took me to dinner, and he said, gosh, I'm glad you cried a little bit first, Winnie. He said, let go of work for now. Let us take care of it. None of this matters if you aren't well. Take the time you need and come back stronger than you were. This will all be waiting. It meant so much from someone that I held in such a high regard. It kind of meant everything at that moment. It was kind of just another Richard lesson. You work hard, you take the time for yourself, and for the people around you who matter. He really had believed in true balance. You know, he was an amazing leader and role model. He was an incredible mentor and a very kind friend. I feel really honored to be part of a very small part of the huge legacy he left behind. And of all the colleagues and trainees that he produced. So I want to say thank you to Richard, to the university for giving me the opportunity to work with him. But really, I want to say thank you to Karen and Brian and Kristen for all the time that you let us borrow from you. I want you to know that it meant a huge amount to a huge number of people. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Brendan, for those very personal remarks, and it clearly illustrates the person that Richard was. Thank you. As a physician and a guiding voice in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, it was Richard's task to work closely with health services partners to make sure that the strategic priorities to improve access and quality of care were aligned with the training and practice. I would like to welcome Dylan Taylor, Medical Director for the K. Edmonton Clinics, the University Hospital, and the Mazankowski Heart Institute to say a few words on behalf of you.
Thank you, Lauren. Karen, Brian, Kristen, all of Richard's extended family, colleagues. It truly is an honor to be able to come and remember some of Richard's and celebrate Richard's accomplishments and his life among us. And I was saying to Verna before we came down that I was sure that we would hear all sorts of different stories, but I also was interested and curious to hear about the themes that we would hear that are common, and we've heard many of those. So I just want to pick up on some of the things on behalf of the hospital, which was his home hospital, really, the University of Alberta Hospital. So Richard walked the hallways of this hospital since his clerkship days, as we heard earlier. And he did that a couple of years before I did that. I graduated a few years after him, just a few years after him. And of course, the hallways originally were the old hospital, not quite as old as in some of the blueprints, but the old hospital before the Walter Mackenzie Center. And we can see how he knew what was behind him. He knew the giants on whose shoulders he stood by the way he honored the legacy and the history of this hospital. And He was a member of the medical staff here, of course, for many, many years, as we've heard since 1986, as we saw in the program. And he was very well known and recognized by many, many of us. He was warm, he was friendly, he was interested in every member of the team, physicians, residents, nursing staff, other staff. He was interested in them as people. And he was a role model for them, not only in his profession, but also in the way he carried himself and in his demeanor and the way he treated others. And, you know, there are many leaders around the world in different capacities, and there was some guy south of the border who died at a much more appropriate age recently, who was known for something that was the antithesis of Richard, because Richard had that vision thing that some people don't have. And we've heard about that today. We've heard about that from his colleagues, from some of his mentees. And he had the vision for what the University of Alberta Hospital could and should be, and the place that it could and should take in the provincial environment, in the national environment, and on the international scene as well. And he had the vision to know how to get from here to there, and how to influence and encourage people with whom he worked in order to accomplish that. And one of the examples of a very concrete, almost literal example of that is just outside the walls here. The Ziedler building was part of Richard's vision for the way the Division of Gastroenterology could succeed. And I heard a story about how the first time that was presented in a drawing, and there was a map of the university hospital site, and it was at the CEO of the then Capital Health region was present, and here was this building drawn on this blank spot in the next to the driveway here. It wasn't a building then, but with his wisdom and his foresight and the way he was able to present it, everyone knew that that had to happen, and we see that there today. And of course, he didn't just think about buildings, and he didn't just think about gastroenterology. In my own specialty area, in the cardiac sciences, Richard had the vision to see that all of the great people who were working in cardiac sciences could actually excel more than they were already. They could reach farther, they could achieve more. And so he engaged the zone, the Edmonton zone, to create a cardiac cabinet to see where cardiac sciences research in the zone could do better, how we could accomplish more, how we could work better together, how we could collaborate more. And of course, as we've heard, he also had tremendous vision for our trainees. One very simple example was he was working with me and my dyad partner, Kathy Osborne, trying to figure out how we could teach residents how to evaluate patients in the emergency department better. Because we know that the length of time that people spend in the emergency department has a significant impact on how they perceive their care. And of course, it also has a significant impact on how much we all cost the health system. So his vision was to teach residents how they could do the kind of assessment that would help them learn quickly, did this patient need to be admitted, or could this patient be safely discharged? So his vision was broad. And as you've heard, he promoted the division, the department, the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry by his recruitment strategies. He's recruited outstanding individuals. He's built collaborations within and without the walls of this building. And for all of that, we celebrate his accomplishments. So thank you again for the privilege of being able to bring those thoughts to you in celebration of Richard's life, his accomplishments and contributions. And we see all of those around us sitting here and on this site. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Those who worked closely with Richard know that in addition to his work as a doctor, as a scientist, and administrator, he was an innovator and an entrepreneur. He recognized the value of translating research discoveries into health solutions for our communities. His research led to the co-founding of Metabolomics Technology, Inc., MTI, and I would like to welcome you, Dr. Haley Wang, a former trainee, colleague, and co-founder with Richard of MTI. Dr. Wang.
Thank you, Dr. Terrell. On behalf of Reg Joseph, David Chang, and all the members at MTI, I'd like to offer our deepest condolences to Richard's family, to Karen, Kristen, and Brian. I had known of Richard for many years before I had the privilege of having him as the supervisor for my master's degree over 10 years ago. Since then, we worked together as colleagues and business partners. He played a significant role in my career development as an academic colorectal surgeon. Not only was he a world-renowned leader in the field of inflammatory bowel disease, he was an excellent role model and provided me with guidance and support professionally and personally throughout the last 10 years. He was one of the busiest people that I knew, and definitely the only person I knew who had run out of pages in his passport from all the business trips and research trips around the world. But he managed his time extremely well, and what inspired me the most was that he always emphasized the importance of family above all. Richard had an amazing ability to provide opportunities to his mentees and truly led by example. He has opened many doors for me and taught me the art of science and even entrepreneurship, as I've had the privilege to work together with him in the journey of taking a research idea through the patenting and commercialization stages. We all knew Richard as an outstanding clinician, but few knew him as an entrepreneur. He had the vision of bringing to the clinic and to the market our research of a non-invasive test to detect colonic polyps before they turn into cancer, allowing treatment to be simple and effective. This vision became Metabolomics Technology, Inc., or MTI, an award-winning University of Alberta spin-off company. MTI brought this polyp detecting test to market quickly and effectively, far ahead of other companies in this sector. Richard was instrumental not only on the research and development side, by utilizing artificial intelligence and machine learning to develop an algorithm for the test, but he also played a significant role in securing commercial partnership and financing from around the world. Richard's passion and tenacity was infectious, and this attracted partners and investment to the company. All of us involved knew we were in MTI for something way larger than for profit. Richard never let any of us forget that. Richard was a builder, possessing fervor and patience. He was bold, without an ounce of hubris or pretension. He was savvy and always straightforward and generous. He always strived for excellence for himself and for those he mentored. It has truly been an honor to have been his mentee, and he will be dearly missed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haley. This has been a wonderful tribute to Richard's life. There's no doubt about it. He was a much-loved doctor, researcher, and he really stressed these partnerships. I would like to invite to the stage one of Richard's closest partners in health, Dr. Werner Yu, who is just celebrating an anniversary as the longest-serving CEO of Alberta Health Services. He is a professor of pediatrics. She was a former interim dean of the Faculty of Medicine. Please welcome Werner.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here, Karen, Kristen, and Brian, the Fedorak family. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome the Deputy Premier and Minister of Health, Sarah Hoffman. Thank you for being here with us today. Richard, as you've heard, was a very special individual, an exemplary husband, father, family man, friend, physician, mentor, and leader, and he was extremely proud of his family. And even though I only met Kristen and Brian for the first time a few weeks ago, he has shared a lot of stories about you and is extremely proud of all you've accomplished. So I feel like I know you. He's had a profound impact on many of us. He's impacted me personally, as well as academically, and has affected many of our professional lives. And in the past few weeks, I've been kind of reminiscing about how we've worked together for so many years. And my first encounter with Richard was when I was Assistant Dean of Student Affairs, close to 20 years ago. And Richard was very well known as the very excellent GI specialist. He was known to have very excellent clinical acumen. He was extremely suave, very well dressed, and just well known throughout the hospital and clinical setting. But it was because of his reputation for his clinical expertise that I called him about a student who had actually had a GI issue. And I still remember to this day, because I wasn't really expecting it, how caring Richard was. He immediately called up the student. He reached out to the student, saw him in clinic right away, provided him with the best care. And so this was my first true introduction to Richard Fedorak. And I'll never forget how kind and compassionate he was with the student. And I've heard repeatedly over the past few weeks, especially, of how he has been compassionate and care for many of his patients, of whom many are in fact physicians themselves. And we all know that the ultimate compliment to a physician is to be a physician's physician, and Richard was definitely that. You've heard about Richard being a visionary leader, not only in his time as dean, but for as long as he's been a member of the faculty, and in fact prior to AHS, as Dylan shared the story of how he came forward to Sheila Weatherall at the time, really with no building plan, just a map of the Walter Mackenzie, a building that he probably photocopied somewhere, came to the head of Capital Health Authority and said, "I have a dream." And his dream became a reality, which is the Ziedler Family Gastroenterology Health Clinic. So this typified many of the things that Richard did. He dreamed big, he made it a reality. And what I really enjoyed most was over the last 3 years, when we've worked really, really closely together while he was dean of the faculty. He knew of our interdependencies, and that in order to be a world-leading health system, that we had to be on the same team. Richard tested all the norms and conventions and pushed all the boundaries because he knew that's how important progress is made. And when he got that twinkle in his eye, and we all know what that twinkle looked like, and grinned in a way that only Richard could do with a slight tilt of his head, I would always get a little nervous. Because I knew that he would come forward with something that was big and bold, that would be really incredibly hard to achieve, but we always knew it was the right thing to do. And so he did it by bringing teams together. He knew that he was an incredible role model for everyone. He respected the power of relationships right down to the one-on-one interactions, and we will miss him tremendously. It's not just a personal loss for many of us, but a loss for Alberta, Canada, and beyond. On behalf of myself and AHS, I wish to pass along our deepest condolences to you, Karen, Kristen, and Brian, and the Fedorak family. Rest in peace, Richard. We live in a better world because of you, and for that we will always remember, and we will always be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Verna. This has been a wonderful tribute to Richard's life. There is no doubt about how much he loved being a doctor, a researcher, and a dean of the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. He often said it was the best job in the world. But above all, he loved his family. His wife, Karen, and his children, Kristen and Brian. Representing Richard's family, I'd like to welcome Dr. Karen Grimsrud, Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, member of the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, Richard's wife and partner in life. Karen.
Thank you, Lauren. I know that Richard always saw you as his primary source of inspiration and therefore held you in very high regard. Thank you for your mentorship, guidance, and support to Richard throughout his time as dean, as one of his wise owls, as he called you. It meant the world to him. I want to sincerely thank the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry for hosting Richard's celebration of life here today. I think he would have been very pleased to see you all here, but also a little overcome with the attention. He was a very proud alumnus, absolutely green and gold forever. Richard and I actually met as classmates in medical school here at the University of Alberta back in 1974. It is a place that first drew us together and also to the field of medicine. by our shared common passion for improving people's lives. Our shared values of respect, compassion, and caring were the foundations for how we raised our family together. It's actually been quite overwhelming for me and for our family to hear how Richard has touched so many people's lives through his work. I'm especially moved by the stories shared by his former students, trainees, and junior staff that Richard mentored, how he supported them to follow in his footsteps and pursue rewarding and fulfilling careers of their own in service and care. I was also comforted to hear from Richard's patients. He profoundly cared for the well-being of so many people, those living with serious chronic diseases. And he worked so hard to give them an experience of fuller, better quality of life. Both these aspects of Richard's career make us immensely proud as Richard's family. I've also realized over the last month that we as his family were somewhat unaware of the magnitude of the depth and the breadth of Richard's professional accomplishments. But beyond being a visionary in his field, he always put our family first. I always knew that. For our children, Kristen and Brian, he wasn't a doctor foremost or a dean. He was their loving dad. And throughout his career, Richard made it a point to come home every night he could for dinner together, making hockey games and recitals and school activities a priority. The family we raised together was the center of our world. He was the pillar of the Fedorak family, a devoted son and brother, and a lively and engaged uncle. Our family's cottage at Hubble's Lake, was his oasis and our family's happiest place. He loved nothing more than puttering around, working on projects, as he called them, setting off fireworks for any excuse at all, and having a glass of wine on the dock with good company. To me, Richard was more than a good husband. He was my soulmate, and always my greatest champion, wholeheartedly supporting me through my own career ambitions and celebrating my successes. He was very protective of his inner circle, which he extended to his closest friends. He was fiercely loyal to his trusted colleagues, people he considered family. The mutual respect of his colleagues is evident from the speeches we've heard today. And really, what more can one ask for in a career? As Dean, Richard had a deep and abiding admiration for those who came before him in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. He believed that great leadership was about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that that impact lasts well beyond your absence. I believe his greatest legacy will be that you continue to fulfill his vision. The family owes heartfelt thanks to so many people, but in this setting, I have personal expressions of gratitude I'd like to make. Firstly, to Denis Kuramoto and the office and staff of the Dean for allowing Richard for a few more months last spring and summer to return to work to the best of his ability. It was so important for him to keep going and doing what he loves so much, and I am so thankful that he allowed him to do that. For Dr. David Turpin and Stephen Dew, for your constant support and understanding over the last almost year and a half now, and for the respectful and competent care that Richard received from the physicians and staff at Unit 5F4 in the General Systems ICU at the University of Alberta Hospital, for the Cross-Cancer Bone Marrow Transplant Department and the Tom Baker Center in Calgary. I will never forget the kindness and compassion everyone showed Richard, as well as us, his family, during the 15 months of his illness. Finally, I am grateful to those of you who spoke today, and for everyone who came to celebrate Richard's life. Thank you for sharing what Richard meant to you. This is obviously a very sad time for us as Richard's family. But hearing your stories today and just being with you will help ease our pain. And even though we think he left us far too soon, we can all agree that he had a very full life. He was so driven and filled with passion and purpose, and he's left an indelible mark on this faculty, its university, across the province, and beyond Canada. He has given us a lot to celebrate. And our family thanks you for honoring his legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing those very special memories with all of us. I want to paraphrase a quote from Forbes magazine. The manager administers, the leader innovates. The manager relies on systems, the leader relies on people. The manager does things right, the leader does the right things. There is no question that Richard was a leader. Richard was loved and admired. And I want to end by saying, Richard, as the first, dean of Ukrainian heritage, you were a remarkable dean, and you raised the bar for all of us, now and in the future. Thank you, Richard. Please join us for a reception, some food and beverages available in both upstairs and downstairs. And you can access washrooms, both sides, outside the door, and free to visit the exhibits and the new exhibit on the Strathcona Hospital that Richard was very proud of. Thank you very much for coming. It's been a wonderful day.